Known as the shining jewel of the human sphere, Neotera is home to the capital of Pan-Oceania. Neotera is the Pan-Oceanian center of industry, art, music, culture, and wealth. Its cultural influence reaches every corner of the human sphere. The Neoterran Capitaline army is known as the shield and sword of the hyperpower, and is tasked with defending this shining jewel. In NCA, you will find Auxilia, a military security force wielding Auxbots, members of the Hexahedron, Pano's covert intelligence agency, bolts, who utilize drop bears and marksmanship to gain the edge in combat, as well as some guest units from LF. NCA also boasts two of Pan-Oceania's quintessential guard units, the Camouflage -6 Swiss Guard and the Multispectral Visor Level 3 Aquila Guard. These are the yin and yang of visual mod gunfighters. NCA's playstyle is characterized by access to maximum firepower. When in doubt, shoot is my motto when playing NCA. Often NCA will focus on aggressive play to decimate all enemy units, then walk over the wreckage to claim the objectives while the enemy flees in retreat. First up, we've got Auxilia. These are units that I try to include in almost every one of my NCA lists because they're really great at doing two things. First, these units are great deployment zone defenders. You can use the Auxbot's heavy flamethrower to watch key corners or maybe table edges to deter enemy units trying to alpha strike the rest of your force. Because the Auxbot is a peripheral, you don't have to worry about losing it because it isn't generating an order. Second, they're also really great specialist options. You can take the Forward Observer profile, which gets a combi rifle, a flash pulse, deployable repeater, and of course the Auxbot. And after they've finished defending your force from a potential alpha strike, they can then move out, take objectives, and then hold and defend that area. The Auxbot is a great corner guard, and the Auxilia itself has a flash pulse and of course a combi rifle to help take on enemies. In general, I always try to pay that extra point for the Forward Observer profile because you just gain so much more utility for only one extra point. As I mentioned earlier, I usually try to include two of these in my list, and I usually put one in each order pool so that if I get the chance to activate one or if one goes down from defending, I still have the other one to move forward and get some work done. Next up, we've got the Fusiliers. These are the backbone of many Pan-Oceanian fire teams, and it's no different here at NCA. You can't really go wrong with choosing a Fusilier core fire team as your main defensive fire team, but you can also really tool these guys up with the various wildcards and other units that can join this team to really turn them into an active turn monster. As for the main profiles to pay attention to, I'm a decent fan of the heavy machine gun for only 1 SWC and 18 points. It's not going to be the best gunfighter in your list, but it's still BS-12. And a BS-12 burst 4 weapon is going to do a lot of work, no matter what faction you're up against. Going down the list, the next one is the missile launcher for only 1.5 SWC and 15 points. If you're really trying to make maybe like a 200-point list, or if you really just want to go for a budget defensive fire team, you can't go wrong with the Fusilier missile launcher. The next one we'll mention are some of the specialist options. You have a hacker as an option for only 15 points and 0.5 SWC, but with Whip 12, it's a little iffy. I think that you can make some really interesting builds when you combine these really cheap Fusilier hackers with an orc troop who can join the link with a tinbot, but even then it's kind of like a gimmicky strategy. Next we've got the Forward Observer, which has a combi rifle, a flash pulse, and a deployable repeater. This one is decent if you need a Forward Observer for a classified or something like that, but in general I think the best choice for a specialist in a Fusilier link is going to be the Paramedic. The Fusiliers have great ballistic skill, so you can use that to your advantage by shooting the medkit over greater distances with the fire team bonuses that you get. In addition, you'll often have some fire team members in this link, like the Orcs or maybe the Aquila Guard, that have really high fizz, so shooting the medkit into them is actually a really viable option to revive them. And finally, we have the Fusilier Lieutenant. It's a solid option because it's so cheap and it can join the link and be a link filler option for only 10 points. What I will say is that if you're planning to bring a Fusilier Lieutenant, maybe think about bringing another basic Fusilier that's not a specialist so that you can sort of hide your Lieutenant between the two. Next we have one of my favorite units in the game, the CSU, the Corporate Security Unit. These are extremely fun to use. They have metachemistry and Sixth Sense. Metachemistry means that you roll a die at the beginning of the game and you get some sort of crazy augment to this guy. You could have 8-4 movement or no wounding cap or other things like that. You're not always going to get something amazing, but when you do, it can really make a difference. The really great thing about these guys is that they count as Fusiliers to compose fire teams. And take note of that. It's not that they can join Fusilier fire teams, but they count as Fusiliers. That means that if you wanted to, you could make a Fusilier fire team that didn't have any Fusiliers in it at all, just CSUs. And maybe some orcs and wildcards, of course. As for the profiles that I like the most, I am a big fan of the Specialist Operative with Rifle, Light Shotgun. It's only 11 points, it's just so good. And you'll notice that 11 points is cheaper than the 12-point Fusilier Specialist options. So often I'll use these CSUs as my specialists in Fusilier fire teams. CSUs also have fire team duo, so you can utilize them as sort of bodyguards for maybe a wildcard Aquila guard or a wildcard Bulleteer. CSUs are also just really great on their own even. You could take the Breaker Rifle with Nanopulsar +1 burst for only 12 points, and because they have Sixth Sense, it means that they're not that vulnerable when they're on their own. I've definitely had games where my CSUs have been able to get to a specific location and take out a really dangerous unit, and I don't really care if they go down because they're so cheap. All in all, highly recommend the CSUs. Anything that's going to have something where you roll to get something random on a chart, I just love it. It's so much fun to play. And next, we have one of the most terrifying remotes in all of the human sphere, the Bulleteer Armbot. This is a ballistic skill 12, size 4, remote with a repeater and mimetism -6. And if that wasn't scary enough, this bot can join fire teams as a wildcard trooper in NCA. There's the super cheap heavy shotgun version for 17 points, and the Spitfire with 1 SWC and 23 points. This unit is an absolute killer in a 5-man fire team, or even a Harris fire team. Because this is a remote, you could bring an Evo hacker to give this guy marksmanship. So let's do the math real quick. We've got a Bulleteer Armbot Spitfire in a core Fusilier fire team. The Evo hacker in the second order pool has spent an order to put marksmanship on our Bulleteer. The Bulleteer Spitfire is now ignoring the -3 for cover of enemy troopers. It also gets a +3 for being in a core 5-man fire team. If it's within its positive range bands of 8 to 24, it's got another +3. Adding it all up, it means that this Bulleteer Spitfire is shooting with 5 dice on 18s. And of course, on top of that, he's got the mimetism -6, and of course, you'll be in cover. Let me tell you right now, this unit is terrifying, to say the least. The main thing to be wary of when using this unit is hackers, of course, and also template weapons. Template weapons don't need to roll to hit, so they're not going to want to roll to hit you when they've got a potential -9 modifier coming back at them. The Spitfire is always going to be my main choice, but the heavy shotgun for only 17 points is going to be a really great option in some of the more expensive fire teams because you can use that 17-point profile to make the fire team cheaper, but also give yourself a mimetism -6 heavy shotgun that you can use to either guard a corner or go straight up to the enemy and blast them with either the hit mode or the templates. Definitely try to include the Bulleteer in your fire teams or in your list in general. It will not disappoint you, and your opponents will quickly learn to fear this unit. Next up, we have the Hexa's Strategic Security Division. This is another mimetism -6 unit, but this one has camouflage and hidden deployment. They also have courage, stealth, and shock immunity. They're a solid ballistic skill 12, CC 17, and whip 13. All profiles come with a paralysis CC weapon with a -3. If you're really in a desperate situation, you can try to get into close combat with these guys and try to immobilize some sort of enemy unit. That said, this unit is most well known for being a great gunfighter and also a pretty great specialist. I think one of the most popular profiles is the multi-sniper rifle because the hidden deployment lets you hide them on the table and reveal in a really opportune time to maybe take out a unit that's gotten caught out of cover, or you can even utilize these guys to overlap with your existing ARO pieces, so your opponent thinks they're about to have a shootout with your Fusilier missile launcher, but in reality, you've got a Hexa standing somewhere behind him, backing him up. The Hexa killer hacking device is a great specialist and also a way of helping defend your tags or remotes by actively hunting other hackers with the surprise attack. Next up, we've got the Locust Clandestine Action Team. Locusts are a Mimetism -6 infiltration unit with total terrain, CC-20, and BS-12. You do have the option of taking these Locusts as specialists, as either the hacker or the killer hacking device, but I would actually recommend that you focus more on the killing profiles, like the boarding shotgun with grenades and drop bears, the submachine gun with decharges and wild parrot, and even the shock marksman rifle or the breaker combi rifle. The key here, because this unit does not have any sort of marker state, is to utilize them as much as possible in the active turn to attack, so you can pick your battles and really try to leverage your Mimetism -6 as much as possible. But these units are also really great for just distracting your opponent from what they should be doing. If your opponent is spending 2 or 3 orders trying to root out a Locust that's on a rooftop somewhere, then those are orders that they're not spending trying to kill the rest of your army. And if you use these guys properly, they are extremely deadly. My personal favorite is the boarding shotgun with grenades and drop bears. There's just so many templates in that profile, and one of my favorite things to do if I'm going first is to actually hold this one in reserve and then roll to infiltrate across the board and really try to take out either a fire team or some other group of really vulnerable units. You can imagine a situation where you can toss some drop bears or set up some drop bears so that they can explode on a group of people, and then round the corner with your grenades or your boarding shotgun and just take out as many as possible. A running theme with this army is that you don't really want to get hit with templates. You're only arm 1, BTS-3 is respectable, but in general the things you want to avoid facing are things like chain rifles or nanopulsars, things like that. Next up, we've got our first Aleph unit in this army, the Deva functionaries. Devas serve a variety of roles in Neotera and are relatively durable thanks to the no wounding cap they have. The biggest deal here for Pano is willpower 15. If you want a high willpower lieutenant, this is the unit to go for. I'm a big fan of the David Lieutenant with triangulated fire and sensor, because you can utilize the lieutenant order to reveal some enemy camo markers, and it also prevents enemy troopers from re-camoing in her zone of control, which is really handy. There's a Deva Lieutenant option with a Devabot peripheral, which is also pretty interesting, because the Devabot can basically serve as your guard for your lieutenant using their heavy flamethrower. Due to the high willpower of these units, the hacking profiles are really appealing, actually, as specialists. Spotlight is a really powerful ARO, and if you've got maybe a Hexa killer hacker to help back them up, you can put your opponent into an awkward situation when they try to reveal and hack your Deva and then receive 2 hacking AROs. Currently, Devas are not linkable at all in NCA, but they're still really solid and capable units on their own. Next up, we've got a pretty awesome AD troop in the form of the Garuda TACbot, another Aleph unit. These are crazy fast 6'4" remotes with ballistic skill 12, phys 11, only armor 0, but BTS-3, which is nice. And of course, we can't forget about the Mimetism -3. As for the profiles, we've got the boarding shotgun for 19 points, the Spitfire for 1.5 SWC and 25 points, and then the Forward Observer combi rifle with a flash pulse for only 20 points. Honestly, these units, because of how cheap they are and how fast and hard they can hit, they will almost definitely earn back their points in a list. I think the Forward Observer is one of my favorite profiles just because it's a forward deploying, technically, specialist in an army that's really locked in their deployment zone, and because of how fast it is, even if you come in on the side of the board, you can get to one of those center objectives pretty quickly. Another really nasty combo that you could do is use the Auxilia with their deployable repeater profile. You can move up one of the flanks with your Auxilia, deploy a repeater next to the table edge, then land your Garuda right next to the repeater, put assisted fire on maybe the Spitfire, and then just send it on its murderous rampage. It's something that takes a little bit to set up, but I guarantee your opponent won't expect it the first time. In general, just really try out the Garuda attack bot. It's the only AD troop we have in this sectorial, but it is absolutely a capable one. Moving on back to some more Pano units, we've got the Neotera bolts. These are a fan favorite for their awesome red helmets and their Australian origin. Bolts are an example of Pano's absolute fire superiority across the board. Ballistic skill 13 along with marksmanship, which allows them to ignore cover mods for shooting. You'll find often that a bolt on their own is going to be hitting on a 16 in their positive range band. It gets even crazier once you put them into a core fire team of 5 members, which brings them up to a nasty BS 19. Along with other medium infantry, they have a bit more armor, so they've got armor 2, and really nice is BTS 6 along with shock immunity. Not only that, but these are veteran troopers, not just in their classification, but they also have the veteran skill. This means that they ignore retreat, they also ignore the isolated state, and they also keep their regular orders whenever the lieutenant goes down and you are in loss of lieutenant. Bolts can form 3 types of fire teams. They have a fire team Harris, they have a fire team Duo, and a fire team Core, and honestly they shine in every single one of them. If you want an ARO piece, you have 2 main options. You have the missile launcher and the MSV-1 multi-sniper rifle. Of the 2, I would almost always go for the MSV-1 sniper just because the added benefit of being able to see through smoke and counteract some mimetism of your opponent is very important, I feel. If you're looking for an attack piece, you've got the Spitfire, which is a solid weapon, and you also have some combi rifle light shotgun profiles with drop bears, which are really sweet. I mentioned drop bears earlier on when I was talking about the Locust, but essentially a drop bear is a mine that you can throw that does not have a marker state. They're really handy offensive tools and potentially defensive tools. But utilized correctly, you can really use drop bears along with the bolts to put your opponents in a lose-lose situation. There are some specialist options here. We've got the chain of command profile with combi rifle and light shotgun. Very solid, and it's the only chain of command we have in NCA. Next, we have 2 different hacking options. One is a regular hacking device, the other is a killer hacking device. Both of them are wielding boarding shotguns with EM mines, which is really nice. Even though bolts are only willpower 12, the hackers are actually fairly durable thanks to the combination of being BTS 6 and also veterans, which means that they can't be isolated by other hackers. The last specialist option is just a paramedic, which can be useful and has the longer range combi rifle and light shotgun loadout. A really fun combination to try out is the Bulleteer wildcard along with a boarding shotgun killer hacker or regular hacker bolt in a duo. Because the Bulleteer has a repeater on board, you're increasing the hacking range of your bolt. The Bulleteer also offers a way to get that bolt up closer into the midfield to maybe take objectives, and the boarding shotgun on the bolt allows you to take on closer range threats that maybe the Bulleteer wouldn't enjoy facing. Since we're talking about bolts, we may as well move over to the Machinist, who has a NCA-specific profile that has bioimmunity and veteran. Bioimmunity is going to let the Machinist use his BTS 3 instead of his armor value for making armor saves, which is really solid. More importantly, the NCA Machinist is allowed to join any fire team of Neotera bolts. So in NCA, you can really make a deadly and durable fire team by combining the wildcard Bulleteer along with this Machinist in a bolt fire team. The Machinist is also cheaper than the average bolt, so it can really bring down the cost overall of your fire team while adding some great utility of a decent specialist. It's definitely worth noting that Machinists are only AVA 1 in NCA, so if you choose to bring your NCA Machinist in a fire team, you won't be able to have a second one with some peripheral bots or something to repair a tag or something like that. Next up, we've got another utility piece, the Black Friar. This is a BS-13 Whip 13 Multispectral Visor 2 Religious Troop that also has a special wildcard profile that you can join any fire team in NCA. That profile is the Discover Plus 3 with Albedo, Biometric Visor, Multi-Rifle, Nanopulsar, and Drop Bears for 28 points. MSV2, along with the Discover Plus 3 and being in a 5-man fire team, can bring this guy's Discover chances up through the roof, and the Biometric Visor is great if you find yourself having to go up against a lot of impersonators often. Albedo means that any MSV troopers in the whole first round of the game cannot see you, and since so many popular ARO pieces have MSV these days, you can definitely make a case for sending this guy on some sort of attack run on the first turn. A really vicious trick you can try out here is you can combine the Black Friar along with a CSU in a duo, move both troopers into line of sight of an MSV trooper. Because the MSV trooper can see the CSU, it has to respond in an ARO against that trooper. So they only have two options. They can either dodge or shoot the CSU and get shot for free by the Black Friar. Moving right along to the heavy infantry, we have the ever-reliable Orc troops. Orcs are a speedy 6-2 move with ballistic skill 14, phys 14, and only whip 12, but arm 4 and BTS 3. Orcs can form either a fireteam Harris or a fireteam Core, but in general I think that Orc troops are really great at providing a durable heavy hitter to some sort of Fusilier fire team, or either operating as a Harris on their own. Rather than taking the Fusilier missile launcher, you could instead go for the Orc with a Feuerbach as your main ARO piece. Similarly, if you want to bring an HMG in your Fusilier fire team, you could go for an Orc HMG instead and get a higher ballistic skill base and of course more armor and an extra wound. There are also several Tinbot profiles that add a firewall -3 to your fire team. For even more utility, you can look at the other Orc troopers at the bottom here that are from the other various sectorials of Pan-O. You've got two different Varuna Division Orcs that come with stealth and either aquatic or jungle terrain, and then two different Winterfor Orcs with mountain terrain and climbing plus. If you've got the extra points, you can't really go wrong with upgrading your Orcs to these kinds of profiles. I'm a big fan of the boarding shotgun Varuna Division Orc with a Tinbot, and also the climbing plus Winterfor Orc with a multi-rifle in Tinbot. A Harris of an Orc boarding shotgun with Tinbot, an Orc HMG or Feuerbach, and a wildcard Bulleteer Spitfire has a tool for nearly every range you would want to be fighting in. Moving on to the first of our two specialized guard units in NCA, we have the Aquila Guard. All Pan-Oceanian guard units have an amazing ballistic skill 15, and the Aquila is no exception. The Aquila also brings a multispectral visor level 3, which allows him to auto-pass on discover checks and also ignore surprise shot from attacks from revealing camo units. There are two main armaments here. You can either bring the multi-marksman rifle or a heavy machine gun. The Aquila can be a lieutenant if you bring the lieutenant multi-marksman rifle profile, but even more amazing is the Aquila FTO fire team option with specialist operative and a multi-marksman rifle. This profile is incredibly good. The multi-marksman rifle gives him just enough range that he can get some real work done, and the MSV3 is going to ensure that he can comfortably hunt camo markers no matter what distance he's trying to discover them from. The multi-marksman rifle gives him access to both shock and AP ammo, as well as a double-action single-shot mode. This unit is amazing because you can put him into any core fire team or any Harris fire team, and you know he's going to do work. You know he's got the ballistic skill to hit his opponents, he's got the guns to actually wound them, and to top it all off, he's pulling double duty by being a specialist as well. If you can justify the 50 plus points for your fire team, absolutely go for it because he will shine like the sun. Moving along, we have one of the most powerful units in Pan-O, the Swiss Guard. Another amazing ballistic skill 15 unit with an extra pip of armor over the Aquila just for good measure. This HI has surprise attack -3, camouflage, hidden deployment, and mimetism -6. There are three profiles. One wields a heavy machine gun, another has a missile launcher and light shotgun, and the final profile is a hacker with a regular hacking device and multi-rifle. I will tell you right now that every single one of these profiles is very good and will do a lot of work on the tabletop. My personal favorite is the heavy machine gun because you can really leverage your mimetism -6 and surprise attack along with a very reliable burst 4 weapon to basically take out anything that you set his sights on. A really notorious profile is the missile launcher. Utilizing hidden deployment, you can wait for the perfect moment when your opponent thinks that they're safe and is walking out of cover with a full link team. Get ready to watch your opponent's eyes go wide when you say, "Actually, I do have an arrow." The blast from this weapon can absolutely ruin an entire link team if you set it up right, and it's for that reason that everyone should know to play against NCA as if there's a Swiss missile launcher in every list, even if there isn't. And because your opponent has to play with that thought in their head, there are often times when they will play a bit slower, or they might make a mistake because they're focusing too hard on trying to avoid getting blasted to smithereens. The light shotgun on this profile also gives him a solid close range weapon should someone try to come up and take him out from close range, or even if you want to move out into the midfield maybe near the end of the game. The hacker profile is our last one, and possibly one of the more vulnerable ones just because it has an additional vector to attack it from in the form of a killer hacking device. That said, don't let that deter you from taking this unit, but rather just keep it in mind and make sure that if your opponent has killer hackers on the table, to always re-camo at the end of your turn. They can't hack you if you're in marker state. But in general, the Swiss Guard is an absolute killer, and there is a very good reason why they are feared among all players of Infinity. Before we move on to tags, I want to mention all of our characters, and NCA actually has quite a few. First up is Fusilier Indigo by Pandra. She's a doctor with Whip 13 in Pano. Bipandra is also a wild card in NCA, so she can be a part of any fire team. And for 22 points, you get a doctor with a combi rifle and a nanopulsar that can totally add some survivability to your fire teams. I tend to use her most often in the fire teams that are more expensive, like the bolts or the orc troops, just because at 22 points, she's actually much cheaper than the others, rather than increasing the cost of a Fusilier fire team to bring her over a Fusilier paramedic. In general, if you ever move out into the midfield with your 5-man fire team and some important unit goes down, you will be thankful if you have Fusilier Bipandra at your side. Next up is Fusilier Indigo Richard Quinn. Quinn is a solid BS-13 gunfighter with MSV-1 and a shock marksman rifle. He is also a forward observer with a flash pulse, so he's once again performing double duty as a specialist, just like the Aquila Guard. In NCA, Richard Quinn's role in your list depends on a few things. His cost is very similar to other units that do a similar job as him. At 23 points, if you have an extra SWC, I think a Bulleteer Spitfire potentially does a better job of being a point man for a fire team than he does. Similarly, if you want to spend a couple more points, you can get a Black Friar, which has MSV2 and Albedo, but isn't a specialist. And of course, if you want to really spend some more points, then you can get the Aquila Guard, who has MSV3, BS15, a better marksman rifle, and is also just a specialist operative, not a forward observer. Richard Quinn is awesome, but he definitely has some other units competing in his points bracket, which just means that you might not take him every time, and that's fine. Our next character is a mercenary, Aida Swanson, the Submondo Smuggler. Aida is a Shazvasti, actually, which is a bit unnerving, but as long as she's on our side, we'll be happy to have her. For 23 points, you get Martial Arts Level 2, Courage, Booty, Forward Deployment plus 4 inches, and Mimetism, along with Stealth, and of course, the Shazvasti special rule. That rule in particular means that when she goes unconscious and is not removed from the table, she still contributes her points to scoring zones for the purposes of objective points during the game. As I mentioned earlier, I have a ton of fun with any unit that gets to roll on a random table, So her having booty means that I'll take her sometimes for sure. She has a submachine gun with +1 burst and viral mines, as well as a viral pistol and shock CCW. I think you can definitely make a case for taking Ida Swanson in any sort of objective room mission, or even maybe a quadrant control type of mission where you're trying to hold zones, because those viral mines will really mess up some people's day. Next up, we have Shona Carano, the Special Instructor and Aristea Swordmaster. If there's one thing that NCA doesn't have a lot of, it's capable CC units, and Shona is here to change that completely. Shona may not be an amazing shot with her ballistic skill 11, but her CC stats are through the roof. CC 23, martial arts level 4, CC attack +1 damage, CC attack armor piercing, and dodge +3, dodge +2 inches, all make for a pretty horrifying CC monster. If you can get Shona Carano into base to base with an enemy tag, they should say goodbye, because Shona is swinging her explosive close combat weapon with AP on a 26 with damage 18. Those dodge abilities mean that she's dodging on a 17 and moving 4 inches on her dodge as well. On top of all that, she's also got no wound incapacitation, but no shock immunity, and super jump. Other than her incredible sword, she's got a submachine gun, a nanopulsar +1 burst, and a flash pulse. Shona's a very interesting character because she is Pan-Oceanian, but she fills a very different role than many of our other characters. I think that Shona is best used wildcarded into either a aggressive core or Harris fire team, but you can also make a case for going into that Bulleteer duo to give the Bulleteer a way to take out close range targets in close combat. And our final character in NCA is our Defiance hero, Indigo Spec Ops Captain Uma Sorensen. Uma is another straight gunfighter in Pano and does not have any specialist profiles to speak of. There are 2 ways to bring her. You can either have a camouflage unit with surprise attack -3 and stealth, or a fire team option with the option of being your lieutenant. All profiles benefit from mimetism -3, terrain total, and climbing plus. Additionally, all profiles are wielding a breaker combi rifle and a submachine gun +1 burst. Uma might be a little more expensive than some of the other characters we've talked about, but up close she's a straight up killer. If you use the fire team option in either a Harris or a core fire team, those submachine guns go up to a whopping 5 dice. Whereas some units bring a toolbox in the form of various skills that go together, Uma's toolbox comes in the form of the various ammo types that she wields. Breaker allows her to target the low BTS of many units in the game, and the submachine guns offer her options to crack armor with AP or remove dogged troopers with shock. If you go for her camouflage profile, an astute player will probably realize who she is, because there are no other camo -3 units in NCA. That said, a camo marker with climbing plus and some awesome weapons can really be useful in a zone control type mission, and she can definitely do some work. For me though, I think I prefer her in a fire team just so I can maximize the output of all of those weapons. And the breaker rifle is very unique for NCA fire teams because they otherwise don't have any way of attacking a target's BTS. Now that we are finally done with all of the characters, we can move on to the tags. First up is the Squallow. I mentioned in the Varuna overview that the Squallow is probably my most reliable tag in terms of performance. The Squallow has BS 15, Armor 8, and BTS 6. It's also got an ECM against Guided for -6, and an ECM Hacker -3, which means that all hacking attacks coming into the Squallow, if they're trying to take you over or immobilize you, they're all going to get a -3 automatically. There are 2 main loadouts. All of them have a multi-HMG and a multi-pistol, but one of them also has a grenade launcher +1 damage. For the base profile, you also have the option of having an NCO or a lieutenant. When I bring the Squallow, I almost always go for the grenade launcher profile, because it offers just another vector of attack that my opponents might not be expecting. And if they do anticipate it, it still means they'll have to play around the fact that I have this weapon. If your opponent likes to bunch up their link teams, where all of the members are all close together, you can really ruin their day with a spec-fired grenade from across the table. My only word of caution there is to not get too invested in trying to launch grenades, because you could end up wasting your whole turn and missing every single one of them. Squallows also have a fireteam duo, which offers some really interesting combinations along with all of the wild cards that we have in this sectorial. For example, you could bring a Bulleteer heavy shotgun in this fireteam, and now you have a repeater moving around with your Squallow to help with hacking support from other units in your army. Alternatively, you could bring Richard Quinn, who is a relatively cheap specialist that can push up the field with your Squallow, and the Squallow can serve as a bit of an escort to get Quinn to an objective. I think the Black Friar is another decent option here because you can do that albedo MSV trick that I mentioned earlier, but with the Squallow instead of the CSU. Obviously, dangling your expensive Squallow for a free hit is not ideal, but it is something that you can do and I think should be noted. The Black Friar also does a great job of hunting camo markers that the Squallow might not want to deal with in the midfield. All in all, the Squallow is an absolutely solid tag, and if you are interested in getting into tags, I recommend the Squallow to be your first one. With all these tags running around, you need a tag hunter, and that is exactly what Pano had in mind when they created the Clausewitz Uhlans. This is another BS-15 tag with ECM guided -6, with camouflage, surprise attack -3, and mimicism -3. The Ulan brings a heavy machine gun and a Feuerbach with +1 burst. This is the kind of tag that really likes outranging other tags and taking them on in their -3. In general, a burst 3 Feuerbach from a BS-15 tag is going to be really devastating to any sort of armored unit that might be a bit of trouble for your other units to remove. The Feuerbach is also a pretty solid ARO piece, so you could utilize this tag as a sniper almost, but if possible, you really want to try to save this guy for the active turn and really shred any sort of opposing ARO units that have heavy armor. The heavy machine gun might have redundant range bands with the Feuerbach, but the heavy machine gun is a way for the Clausewitz Uhlans to go into suppressive fire. There are arguments that can be made whether or not you should put him into suppressive or put him back into camouflage state, but I think that it really matters on the situation you are in with your opponent. If your opponent has a sensor unit close by, or even something with MSV, it might be more useful to go into suppressive fire rather than going into camouflage state. The suppressive fire can also be really useful for keeping your opponent out of a certain area of the table. Some people might struggle to fit the Ulan in their list when they're bringing something like a Swiss already, who does a very similar job, but you cannot deny the durability of the Ulan and also its ability to perform multiple roles by being anti-infantry with the heavy machine gun and anti-armor with the Feuerbach. And with that, we are done with the overview of NCA, the Neotera Capitaline Army. If you are interested in playing NCA, I think it's absolutely necessary to pick up a pair of Bulleteers. They will be useful in any Pano sectorial you play, and their power in fire teams in NCA is undeniable. NCA's playstyle hinges a lot around getting into the right kind of firefights and winning them unquestionably. Always be mindful that you bring the best shooter for the job, and be sure that you don't lose sight of the mission in your hail of gunfire. Thanks for watching.